Welcome to the EchoCast, episode 69, the single spinoff. The single spinoff, because I've got to sensationalize something. The Division's getting a spinoff, but probably not. I am Bon Diesel. I do Division things. I like Division. This is a podcast about the Division 2, the community, and things around the game, and sometimes just whatever I feel like chatting about. Today we do have one topic that's not Division. So stick around and see what it is. Today we will cover State of the Game recap, single player Division 2 spinoff, comic podcast, listener questions, and some personal and content updates. If you'd like to support this podcast and my other content, please check out patreon.com/theechocast. I want to give a thank you to the newest patron, Jimmy, and thank you to Mike, November, Hassan, Tim, Jim, and Ozzy for already supporting this show and my content. If you are a new or current patron, please let me know so I can send you some free stickers, and I can make you a VIP on Twitch to make sure that you can check these recordings live if you would like to. You can message me on Twitter, Discord, wherever. Okay, so State of the Game recap. Today we had Hamish and Yannick, which felt like a throwback State of the Game, if you ask me. Rip Petter. He's doing big stuff, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Basically, this was a pretty simple State of the Game. Some little info, drippy drops, but nothing too crazy. The big thing was reminding everyone that episode 1 releases on this coming Tuesday, July 23rd. This includes the expedition, classified assignments for season pass holders, new missions, skill changes, balancing, bug fixes, discovery mode for the raid. Sorry, that was weird. And a new Shepherd ranking system, which we'll talk a little bit about. The big thing to keep in mind is that the expedition, the classified assignments, and the new missions are restricted to season pass holders for a week until the 30th. And then the expedition and new missions open up. The classified assignments are always for season pass. My advice with that is if you want every little bit of content from the game, grab the season pass, especially if you can find it on sale or being given away. Otherwise, the missions are super simple, and basically there's a few cool cosmetics and a touch of story to check out. But don't feel like you're missing out big time. But if you want to check it out, go nuts. They talked about that there is a updated social space outside of the Boo. They kind of streamlined it and made it look a little better. I think Hamish kind of made it sound like they added the recalibration and crafting station under the helicopter pad, which was already there, but they did kind of rearrange some things. It looks a little bit cleaner. I suspect some of that stuff they just kind of threw in there, and now they've kind of cleaned it up a bit, made it look a little bit more purposeful. The big thing they announced, which I was kind of surprised by, was a new Shepherd system. So if everyone remembers when the game came out, there was that super annoying system where if people were requesting help, it would show for every single person on their platform. So they very quickly fixed that up. And if you didn't know, you can actually keep that enabled for clan members, which I have, and is very useful. But what they're doing now is there's a new Shepherd system where if you help someone out through the help system, when you're done with the activity, the person you help will have they'll have an ability to to give you credit or to not. And if they give you credit, it goes towards a Shepherd rank that goes up to rank 99. And I believe gets you exclusive cosmetics and stuff like that. I suspect it's also just to be kind of a cool, maybe I'm kind of wondering if this will be a little bit of a DZ indicator a bit. If you'll be able to see this, you might be able to say, hey, that person's very helpful. Maybe they aren't going to murder me. It may also be a thing for DZ people to do, who want to murder people who don't think they'll murder them. So, but new Shepherd system, I'll talk about that more in a bit. There's a new clothing event coming, which Hamish said he talked about last week. I don't recall that, but it's a summer fun or something like that, he said, and he seemed extremely excited about it. He had just seen some of the stuff this morning, and he seemed excited in kind of a facetious way. I know that's not the right way to say that, but I used to have a speech impediment and still kind of do, so sorry. So I'm hoping for some booty shorts for Bori. If you watch my stream, you'll know what that means. And then finally, they said that there should be some kind of Twitch Prime stuff coming, but they didn't have any details. I suspect that it's completely handled outside of their world. They did remind people that there will be no server maintenance on July 18th, citing the upcoming patch, which will kind of take care of that. They did want to clarify and remind people that they hear the conversations happening about PvP, about loot. They hear these conversations about all this stuff. It's just, it doesn't mean that they have a response today. They said that it'll be addressed soon by the people who know most about those changes, so specifically PvP. I assume they'll have Terry and the people on from Red Storm soon. And they know that there's still an issue with the Revive Hive and Specialized Ammo, and they're working on it. There was no kind of maybe it's going to be fixed on Tuesday, but my guess would be it won't be if I had to throw it out there. But we'll have to wait and see. They gave some props to Mr. Commendation. If you search for that person, I believe on YouTube and on Twitter, they are someone they're kind of like a commendation hound. And I believe they've been the first person to get max commendation score twice. I could be wrong. But he has been doing an insane number, almost every night, I think, of raid runs and shepherding people through the raid. I believe he's on PS4, so if you want help on that platform, check him out. And it seems like he's super, super kind and really doing a good service to the community. So even if you don't need help, I suspect dropping some congrats, some high fives, some claps on Mr. Commendation. They deserve it. There is a new and they talked about there being a new official Division game podcast on most services, and it's from the writer of the Extremist Malice comic. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And that was about it. So they had some agent highlights. I was super honored to be featured in the Division Shots feature again. So thank you, Division Game. I appreciate that. My thoughts on the state of the game. I'm excited for episode 1. I'm lukewarm on the Expedition. I'm going to play it, I think the Expedition, again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, it's a little underwhelming, and the fact that I think they're artificially lengthening how playable it is by releasing the 3 different investigations over 3 different weeks, considering they take like 25 or 30 minutes to do, is a real bad look. That's an awful decision in my opinion. They should just release it all, let people realize that there's like 2 hours of content there, maybe, and just get going. Just let it be what it is at some point. I hope that when they add the mastery system eventually, that helps it out a little bit, and even maybe some of the harder difficulties will be more fun. But we'll have to wait and see about that. But besides that, I'm still really excited. I think the rest of Title Update 5 makes up a lot for the Expedition being a little bit of a letdown. So I think people should be excited. Seems like there's going to be big changes in the game. It's not going to be the end-all be-all patch that fixes it for everybody, and that's okay. Whether you agree with me or not, let me know. I'm happy to hear your opinion. So I'm pumped. I'm excited to play it. I'm really excited to play the 2 new missions and the classified assignments. So the Shepherd system, I think, sounds awesome. I think that's a great way to incentivize some helpful behavior. They just had, and maybe still currently, I don't know, have a $20 sale going on where you can get Division 2 pretty darn cheap in a lot of different places. And this should be a good way for maybe some bored, maybe some more experienced players to help out some less experienced players. Maybe you can find yourself a raid group eventually this way. So that shepherd system sounds cool, and I hope that they have some cool cosmetic rewards. I'm sure when I've got nothing to do, this will be a thing I will be going after. And I'm glad they keep addressing the issues, even if they don't have answers right now. I think with the first game that there were definitely situations where they obviously knew that there were problems with the game, and maybe they weren't as vocal about them as they should have been, even just simply acknowledging that the issue was being talked about, or that people had an issue with it, which led to people saying that they were ignoring the problem when really they weren't. They ran a fine line with the first game where they had to balance the whole idea of acknowledging an issue and maybe not giving info that was 100% correct, and not acknowledging an issue because they didn't have 100% information yet. So this time I think they're doing a good job of saying, hey, we hear you guys about that, but we're not ready to talk about it yet. Sorry. And not giving any promises, not giving anything for people to latch on to. I think they're doing a good job with that. It doesn't excuse the issues being there. It doesn't excuse the issues not being addressed. But yeah, it just kind of is what it is at this point. I think it's fine. And I hope that Title Update 6 is going to be the big RNG loot PvP patch that the game obviously needs. Okay, so when it comes to Division 2 and gaming news in general, the first item is Julian quote tweeting a statement from someone saying, man, Division would be a great single player game. And man, if anyone listens to this podcast, doesn't that sound familiar? For what, the last month? I've mentioned this, and I know I've mentioned it in the past too. It's kind of funny because when Julian did that, some rather clickbaity websites ran with it and basically decided that, well, I guess there's a single player game coming. And that's obviously not going to be a thing. Even on Kind of Funny with Game Over Greggy, they talked about it. What I would say is that if he's chiming in on that, what I think is most likely, would I love to have, a Division spin-off game or even a Division 3 that's a very different type of game. That's like a 40, 50, 60 hour experience. That's this gritty single player, realistic, drops the RPG mechanics, just this really amazing single player experience. For sure. I think that'd be great. But I just don't see them getting away from the brand like that. I think that's a neat idea, but just not realistic. What I think is way more realistic is, I believe, maybe with Division 2 in a year 2 or a year 3, probably more likely not until Division 3, which I know sounds insane right now, but I've learned enough about these things to know that there's a decent chance that they already know exactly what's going on for the next 2.5 years of Division 2. I could be wrong though. I don't know enough to be sure. But what I think is way more likely is that we would get a single player DLC. And I think I've talked about that before, and I think that would be super cool. I would be perfectly happy if there was a DLC, say the second DLC of year 3, and they spend time, because that's going to take a single player experiences take a real long time because of all of the animating you have to do, all of the voice acting you have to do, set pieces and all that stuff. I mean, it's much more challenging than what we currently do, than what we have in this game. But if they provide us a 10 hour experience, it'd be replayable, if you wanted to. Maybe it'd give some good loot if you did it. Maybe some exclusive loot of some type. But it would be so cool if they gave us this really finely crafted, really just kind of a different pace game, DLC, where it's just 10 or 15 hours, that's probably pushing it, of just this really cool story that you get to play through. Maybe you play your agent trying to find their family, or maybe you play as another agent. Maybe it's a completely separate experience from the rest of the game, and it sends you back to New York, and you play through as an agent who's trying to do a thing, I would be down for that. I think that'd be super cool. And I think something like that is way more likely than them going whole hog into some spin-off completely dedicated to single player game. So while I personally would love the idea of them going that direction, I think that they're going to stay pretty true to this brand for at least another game or two, more than likely. The second part here was, as mentioned, Petter interviewed Christopher Emgard. I'm sure I pronounced that horribly wrong. Who is the Extremis Malice comic writer. What's interesting about him is that he has done a bunch of stuff for Dark Horse, who's the people, the company who did the Extremis Malice comic books before the Division 2 came out. And a little yawn there, sorry. And he was put on this project by Dark Horse when they didn't even know that he was actually involved in the early building of Division 1. He left before it was finished. He used to work for Massive, and he was a big part of building the story of Division 1. So he was kind of accidentally really well suited to work on this comic because he also consulted on Division 2's story. What was most interesting, I suggest you check out the interview. It's on SoundCloud, Spotify, it's everywhere. The Division 2 or the Division game has a official podcast. And if you go look for it, it's a bummer. They used to have a bunch of podcasts way back to the beginning of the first game, and some of those podcasts are just awesome. I don't know if they've re-uploaded them or not, but there were some podcasts about like survival and the hunters, the AI, building the world. There's some really cool ones, and this is another neat one. So I don't want to go into it and talk about everything they talked about. They actually didn't talk about Division the whole time, so if you want something other than that, it's got that too. But the most interesting part of what he talked about was it really seems like at least he is wide open to telling a lot more stories. If you didn't read the comic, it ties into Division 2 for sure, very closely. But it definitely told a story from kind of a different angle. And he seemed really big about telling lots of stories from different angles in this universe. And even to the point of telling the story of like the kids who are going through this situation, telling the story of civilians going through it. I think it'd be cool to hear the story of like law enforcement, when all this went down and it just seemed like a civil disturbance, and then it turned into more, and then it turned into utter chaos. I think there's a lot of angles they could take on this. Maybe even one day having a comic following Keener. I think that'd be super cool to kind of show what he was up to between all of his little cryptic messages for us. So yeah, check out the Extremis Malice author official podcast for Division. It's really great, and it's really awesome to hear Petter again. And then the final little bit of gaming news here is actually about Ghost Recon. So Ghost Recon Wildlands announced today their final update for the game before Breakpoint comes out, and it's the Mercenaries mode. Here it is, folks. It's the Battle Royale mode that probably should have come out 3 years ago for this game. So that's what it is. It's Battle Royale. It's only 8 players. It's a PvE/VP. So I've seen people already compare it to Survival. I think that's a pretty big stretch for multiple reasons. I do think it's super, super cool that they're adding this pretty significant content at the very end of the game. If I was a betting man, I would say that this is almost guaranteed to be some kind of a light test for a mode they're going to put in Breakpoint. But who knows? That's only a guess on my part. The problem is that I assume this isn't going to change their cover system. I assume this isn't going to change the completely numb shooting mechanics. And I assume this isn't going, and I believe someone's already confirmed that it's still not dedicated servers, that it's peer-to-peer servers. Now, I've been linked multiple times from people when I've complained about this, that Wildlands uses a hybrid server system where essentially it's peer-to-peer, which means that one of the 8 people is the host, and everyone is connected to their Xbox or their PlayStation or their PC as the host, as the server. Now, I've read about the big Ubisoft thing where it talked about how they use relays that like evens it out so the host doesn't technically have an advantage and all that. The problem is that when I've looked into that, everything from Ubisoft says that, but then in tests I've seen from other people, it's not as bad as it used to be, like in Halo and stuff like that, or Call of Duty, but it's still not good for a competitive sense. And I'm especially curious, the only 8 players is definitely because the way that system would work is that it's depending on that host machine to control even the PvE part of the game and stuff like that, I assume, because that's all got to be synced up since it's going to be PvE as well. So I plan on loading up Wildlands tonight on the Xbox, and I plan on jumping on and playing this tomorrow, probably on stream, at least for a couple rounds. Unless you have to have the season pass like you have with all of their other modes to play it right when it comes out, which is just blows my mind that this game's reception was not good. And I'm glad there's dedicated people who kept playing it and were able to ignore just what they did to the Ghost Recon franchise with this game, or they had never played an old Ghost Recon, or they just like this game. There's nothing wrong with that. I obviously didn't. Supposedly there's a lot of support for this game still. I know when I've tried to play PvP in recent months, it has not seemed like there's many people still playing, but I definitely may be wrong. But I do, for the people who are still playing this, who are interested in this, I think this is a great addition. I think it's really cool to see Ubisoft support this game that I suspect doesn't have a big player base anymore, right up until the very end after 3 whole years. That's commendable at the very least. So good for Wildlands. And you know what else is good for Wildlands? A mid-roll. So you're about to hear 2 ads, 60-ish seconds, wink wink, hint hint. See you on the other side. Okay, so community topics and discussion. So this time I am going to talk about what path the Division 2 is going to take compared to its peers in the looter shooter world. And I'm going to talk about microtransactions and if they're ever okay. And obviously using Division as an example, but just kind of talking about it in general. So if I had to pick, I've got four games listed here that I would say are in the same general genre as Division, right? So we've got Anthem, Destiny 2, Warframe, and Borderlands. Now with each of these games, there's some difficulty in comparing them for multiple reasons. With Anthem, well, really with all of them, none of these games provide what I would consider a similar playing experience. They're definitely in a similar genre, being looters and shooters for the most part. And I think that's where the comparison kind of has to end in a lot of ways. Borderlands is first person only and has no PvP. And isn't open world, kind of is. It seems like the new one definitely will be more so. Warframe is free to play, is a lot more based on its movement mechanics and melee combat, with shooting also kind of, and ultra grindy repetitive play of the same missions. Warframe's weird, but it's in the pool. Destiny 2 being very movement based as well, first person shooter only, open world ish, but not really, kind of a deal. And then Anthem just is Anthem. Again, it goes way more towards kind of the movement is so much bigger of a thing. That's what I think is really interesting, really almost about all 4 of these games, is that they all are set in unrealistic worlds. So that allows them a lot more freedom with the way the games play. And so I've always found it really hard to take overly seriously comparing Division to these games. I think it's appropriate to do it because there is enough similar. But for me, it's way easier for me to compare Anthem and Warframe, or Destiny and Borderlands, or Anthem and Destiny. Like for me, that's so much easier of a comparison. But I still think it's worth doing. So So Anthem, I'll at least give my opinion on how these games have played out, and then kind of say how I think Division will follow. So Anthem obviously had a ridiculous amount of hype. I was hyped for it when they first announced it in 2017. Super hyped. Looked amazing. Couldn't wait to add this to my playing with Division, right? And then 2018 came. I was actually at E3, which meant I actually saw all this Anthem coverage that they did last year way after the fact. And when they showed some real gameplay and not just that one little snippet of the mission that we know now was not even part of the game, it was completely crafted 100%. I remember when I saw Anthem in 2018 and being kind of like this, that doesn't look the same. That doesn't look fun. That looks boring. But then Anthem came out. It seemed like people liked it for a minute. And then the litany of bugs and bad mechanical choices alongside the lack of content, and even to this day, kind of lack of content. I still hear people talk about that they like the combat loop, which is good. You're supposed to be Iron Man, essentially. That's the whole idea. At least that's how I've seen a lot of people compare it. I played the beta and the alpha of this game, and knew I wouldn't ever spend a penny on it. It's had a rough go, right? And we're 7-8 months into it now, and it doesn't seem like it's gotten any better at this point. To the point where I think some people at least should be concerned that maybe it's done. Maybe they'll release one big content update and then say, sorry, bye-bye. Destiny 2 was released with lots of hype. People were excited. It came out. If people remember, I actually played a decent amount of it when it came out. And it came out to a lot of kind of confused fans. People were really confused to why they removed so many features from Destiny 1. Basically, the overall feeling, at least as far as I could see, was that people were really confused to why it seemed like Bungie had completely forgotten all the lessons of the first game, and even given kind of a stripped down version for Destiny 2. And that went on for months. There were some improvements, there were some upgrades, things did get a bit better, but it took until the Forsaken patch, the Forsaken update, before I think the majority of people were like, okay, cool, this is Destiny, and I should have looked it up before I got on here, but that was more than a few months before that happened. If I remember correctly, Forsaken was over a year after the game came out. Feel free to correct me wherever you're listening to this, or on my Twitter. Then Warframe was an interesting game that bounced around some development hell from Digital Extremes when they were trying to find people to publish it. And long story short, it released on their own. And I don't know if they did a free-to-play when it first came out or not. I can't remember. But long story short, Warframe was garbage when it came out. It was really, really bad. It didn't do anything the way they wanted. And then it's slowly but surely improved. It's probably one of the best recovery stories of any game ever. Even more so, I think, than No Man's Sky and stuff. It's not talked about as much anymore. I think it has a large fan base, but it's still fairly niche. But people seem to really like it. And one of the funny things about Warframe is, at least from my experience with it, is it's so heavily based on its movement mechanics, which I believe were actually a bug early in the game that people were abusing to move really, really quickly. If I remember correctly, you were not supposed to really move very quickly in Warframe. And then the devs realized, man, people really seem to like this, and they went all in on it. So Warframe, I feel like, isn't quite as popular as Warframe fans think it is, but I do think it is very good for its fan base, and it seems to have a very loyal and very good fan base. So it's another game that started off rough and built its way up. And then Borderlands, I think a lot of people would kind of consider the grandpappy of the looter shooter genre. The first game and even the second game are fairly dated at this point. I've tried to go back and play them, and I honestly just can't. A lot of their shooting mechanics and just game mechanics in general just are hard to get into these days, at least for me. I know Borderlands 2 is a little bit better off. these games, their art style and just some of the stuff isn't really my deal, but really, at least 3 of these games are games that I fully recognize as games that are extremely good, but just maybe aren't my style. And Borderlands is definitely there, but Borderlands definitely deserves the respect from any looter shooter fan of being like the OG and being the example. Obviously, like I said, this game, it doesn't have PvP. I believe it's going to have co-op. And this new one looks like it's going to be much more expansive and bigger than the first 2. But if I had to look at these games and decide which one I thought Division 2 was going to end up being the most like, it's probably Destiny 2. I would argue, and I'm sure people would disagree with me, and I'm happy to hear it, so please drop it in the comments or on my Twitter or whatever. Discord is a good spot. That I believe that Division 2 right now, so we're 4 months in, I believe that Division 2 4 months in is way miles ahead of where Destiny 2 was 4 months in. Now there's a logic to be made there of, well, Division 2 shouldn't have made the mistakes. You know, it shouldn't matter if it's better off. I agree. I get that point. But what I'm getting at is that Destiny 2 got their crap together and now have the most popular looter shooter game. And I don't think Borderlands is going to challenge them. I think it will for a while, but I just don't think Borderlands is going to have the appeal that Destiny does. But I could be wrong. But I think Destiny definitely is the game I see kind of mimicking the Division. You know, I think the Division is going to follow a similar path. And because I think it has a better starting spot, it's going to do even better. Why do I think that? Well, I think we have a very dedicated team, just the same as Destiny did, for better or worse. I think that they are hearing people out. I think they are making changes. I think they are doing the right stuff. But I do think that they, you know, I know a lot of them are Destiny fans. I think if there's a game here, I think they've already done better than Anthem is probably ever going to do. Warframe is just a weird situation because of their pay structure, and that's just a weird game. It's just a weird game. And Borderlands, I just think is too different. So, you know, and I think it's something we can all hope for. So please become super duper good like Destiny 2 is, even though I already think you're pretty good. I digress. Okay, and then microtransactions. I've seen a lot of talk. It's kind of interesting. So there's a lot of talk going on right now about the Division 2 season pass. And there's a lot of people who are basically saying they want more stash, and they bought the season pass because it said they would get more stash. Now, I think the first thing to say about that is that they very, very, very clearly, in multiple ways, clarified what that meant. It initially probably meant that you were going to get extra stash than everyone else. But then with some pay to win allegations and rumors and chitter chatter going on, I think they changed course, which I think was a good choice, and basically made it where you got a little bit extra stash earlier than other people, which, as we all know if you've played the game, is basically useless because you shouldn't be keeping things early in the game anyways. I think that 99% of people bought the early access to play the game 3 days early and then to play the DLCs 7 days early. I have no stats to back up that 99% number, just my pure personal opinion. But I can't help but roll my eyes a little bit when I see people losing their mind about the extra stash space. At the end of the day, at least in my opinion, they pissed off a few people about the extra stash space instead of making way more people mad about giving stash space for money in a pay-to-win sense. That would have been such easy pickings for people like the Drama Club dropout Jim Sterling and all those people that I think have very extremely selfish motivations when it comes to reporting on microtransaction stuff, but at the end of the day probably have a point about microtransactions being terrible, being bad for gaming in general. I even in Division 1, I still argue that Division 1 microtransactions were stupid, but not as bad as they were portrayed by a lot of people. The encrypted caches were annoying because you could buy them, and you could buy keys for them, and it was randomized, and you could get dupes, and it never quite worked out, and you could have spent a lot of money to get everything. But my issue was that I think there was enough of an argument against microtransactions in that simple sense of they're random and it's just basically gambling, and that's dumb. The problem is that I think people step into a sensationalistic side of things when they start, what about the children? I know that happens. I know kids steal their parents' credit cards and spend a crap ton of money on these things, and it's probably not good for them in their brains. But you don't need to make that point to make the overall point. The same as people saying that, there's gambling addicts, and what if they use this? I am the son of a gambling addict, and I promise you that if you don't allow them to get through their gambling addiction on Division, they'll find another way. So again, another point that I think maybe has good intent, but doesn't need to be made, because the overall issue with microtransactions is the problem to start, at least in my opinion. So then we go into a conversation, or at least a thought process that I was trying to go through. Is there room for something like that? And I will say my answer right off the top is just no. And I would say it's partially because it's not just a good thing to have in your games. I think it's a bad look. And it's just not worth the drama, in my opinion. So the first thing is, should there be stash space that's purchasable? In the first game, they never went there. At some point, they did give us a bunch of extra stash space. And then they also expanded the backpack limit significantly. There's this weird thing where it's like, there's this balance, in my opinion, where if, say they offer people an extra 200 stash spots for $5, it's permanent, you pay it once, you have it forever. Well, that turns into a weird argument. It's like, well, if you can expand it 200 spots only for $5, why even try? Why not just do it? But then if they charge people $10 or $15 or $20, then they look greedy and they look like they're ripping people off. And maybe they are. Or if they do $5 a month, you have to keep paying it to keep it. So stash space is a weird one. And this is one where really I'm only covering this topic because I want to hear from anyone who's listening, either on my Discord, on Twitter, in the comments of the YouTube video. If there's comments on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, let me know. I'm curious to what you think. Is there a way for them to charge people for stash space that you don't believe is abusive or will be looked at badly? When it comes to cosmetics, I'm cool with it. I think that if I want to buy this cool skin and I have to buy some stupid credits to do it, I'm a grown-ass man and I'm going to do it. Honestly, I don't like a ton of the cosmetics in Division 2 so far, so I haven't really spent much money on them. When it comes to the events, the clothing events, I've been playing through the whole event. And then on the last day, if I'm missing anything, I buy a few caches because they're guaranteed. There's no randomness to the purchased ones. And so if I grind 20 of the 25 stashes or caches, then I'll buy enough keys to buy those last 5. And then I get my set. I'm happy. I think cosmetics are fine, but it just seems like so many places are on such a slippery slope with that. When it comes to content with microtransactions, they did this year 1 of Division 2 with having all 3 episodes for free. If I had to guess, I'm assuming the Division the Division 2 year 2 is going to be a paid season pass. $20, $25, $30 maybe. I think that's about as much as they should charge. I hope they don't go the way of, $40, $50, $60. If they do, then episode 2 and 3 of year 1 need to blow people's minds. And the game's going to need to get fixed up in a very significant way. And they need to be, they're going to need to be real clear about what that 40, 50, 60 bucks is going to get you in year 2, even if it's only 20 or 30. I will buy it. Like, come on, let's be straight up. I'm sure I'll get it. But I do think that the mystery behind this year 1, episode 1, 2, and 3, because it was free, was okay. I'm going to be totally honest. If 6 months ago they would have told everyone what an expedition was, I think a lot of people would have been like, you know, I think there's kind of a reason that we didn't hear much about the expedition until the PTS. But I've said before that I have a lot of faith that I think episode 2 and 3 are going to be a lot better for reasons unknown. But yeah, the content I think is a whole different thing. And I'm really curious to see how people are going to react to whatever they do for year 2. But that's a ways off, so let's not worry about it yet. Okay, so I've got a couple listener questions. I've got Polidoro. Both of these questions today I had to kind of shorten. But basically, Polidoro asked any tips on how to make a second character run more exciting. They mentioned with Division 1 where they would have to use anything they picked up or something like that. I would say you could do that with Division 2. If you want to do a run where you have to pick up any item that drops and you have to equip it. In the 1 to 30 run, that's probably going to be okay. It's probably going to make you more powerful every time you pick something up. The big thing is it may lead you to using some guns you would have never used otherwise. Some double-barreled shotguns or something like that. Another idea that I could give you is what some people did in Division 1 is do a permadeath run or permadeath runs, where if you go down and you die where you have to respawn, you delete your character. So there's a couple ideas. The second question came from Morgan Amps, and he kind of gave some personal opinion and then followed it with a question. So I tried to summarize it here. Morgan Amps feels kind of a 1.3 vibe in Division 2 and asks, when do you think the balance, dark zones, and so on are going to get fixed or worked on, even if it's against what the community wants, and then asks if there needs to be a new ETF. So the interesting thing about fixing the loot, flip the fix loot switch. That's what everyone wants. Fix the dark zones, make them 1 dark zone again and make it 24 people because that was better. The interesting, I see there's 2 things about that to me is that, one, a lot of the suggestions I see people throwing out are just unrealistic. Like I've seen people literally saying that they need to get rid of the 3 dark zones and make it 1 dark zone again and make it 24 people again. I'm not really, but in theory, I'd be willing to put every penny I own on them never doing that. Maybe they'll make some changes to stuff in the long run, but to this point, I don't get the impression that they are ever going to change the population in the DZs, and I certainly doubt they're going to completely redo the whole map to put the DZs together again. So that's like when I see that kind of talk, there's a part of me that understands that person just really wants that's a thing that they desire, but that also has a hard time taking it seriously because it's just so ridiculous. The other problem is that you run into the idea that say there's 5 major groups in this game, which is not true. There's many more than that. But say that's it. And say they make all the changes and all the bug fixes and all the balancing and all of the dark zone and PvP changes that satisfies 3 of those groups. There does not exist a world where all 5 of those groups, where every player who plays this game is going to get every change they want. Because a change that satisfies 3 or 4 of the 5 groups will infuriate the 5th group. Or a change that makes 2 of the groups happy will infuriate the other 3 groups. So they're literally playing an impossible game of trying to make a game that, well, it's impossible to perfectly satisfy everyone who plays this game, because there's so many people playing this game for so many different reasons, with so many different backgrounds and so many different agendas. And there's a group of players or community members involved in this game who don't give a damn if this game gets better, and they just love being heard. I've gotten flack for saying that. I don't give a crap. I know it's true. I know there's people who were in this community in the first game who did not like the game, who did not like Division. But they saw it as a way to make some money and to get some attention and get some followers and get some clicks. And so you're not going to make that group happy. So what I think people need to realize is that if they can make everyone in the game like 75% happy, that is a unheard of victory. And I would say that is not where we're at. You know, I would say there's some groups who like this game that much, but not everyone. And what I think people need to realize is that, and whether or not that changes their opinion or their mind, you know, doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But what I think people need to keep in mind is that they are trying to satisfy, they're trying to do an impossible thing. So what's the most likely is that they're going to do the best possible job they can. Are we there yet? Absolutely not. The game is nowhere near even that point. But people have to realize that that's probably the target. I doubt there's anyone at Ubisoft who thinks they're going to make this game perfectly perfect for everyone. It's not possible with any game. It's not possible in real life. It's just not a thing. It's not the way the world works. And so when do I think they're going to do that? Probably never. I don't think that they're ever going to do everything everyone wants. But I would say that we could, as soon as like a title update 6, have a game that will still have issues, that will still not perfectly make everyone happy, but that will be in a spot where people are like, okay, this is better, but here's still some things I don't like. And that's a place where they can really move forward with adding more content, episode 2 and 3, new missions, new modes, new things like that. And then I think if they can get there, then they can move into a year 2 that people may be willing to pay for. Sorry about that. If that's the way they do it. So we'll see. As for a new ETF, I don't, ETF is tough, man, because the ETF was so good in some ways and so bad in others. It feels like in Alpha Bravo and Charlie, there was some good that came out of each one and some bad that came out of each one. If you look back at those rosters, each of those rosters had some people who probably really helped, and each of those rosters definitely had some people whose opinion should have never even been considered. And it just blows my mind. And, you know, hindsight's obviously 2020. I'm weird about an ETF. I just don't. Again, the ETF turns into a thing where no matter who you pick, no matter who you send, you're not gonna get a full swath of the community. The funny thing is that I appreciated a lot of the people who were in ETF, and I'm sure they brought a lot of really great ideas. But if they did an ETF for Division 2, what I would prefer is if they were all NDA'd and if they never revealed who they were. And I would prefer if they were people who they could tell had lots of playtime and an understanding of the game, like different parts of the game, but they were not streamers. They were not YouTube creators. They were not podcast makers. I would prefer if they were people that no one has ever heard of. Because I think those people will provide feedback that comes from someone with a realistic outlook on how the game is played by people who really play the game. Not people who are trying to get partnered on Twitch, not people who are trying to get clicks on their YouTube video, and not people who are trying to stay relevant in the podcast verse, like myself. So ETF, I don't know, probably couldn't hurt, but I would like to see it done in a very different way. Okay, let's wrap this baby up with some content updates. So I'm trying to get more consistent with the streams, even if they're fairly short. I believe this is the 5th stream in a row I've done. So, and I plan on being on tomorrow, taking Friday off, and then being back Saturday morning. So I'm trying to get consistent with that, trying to get into a routine with it. So here in a few weeks, when the little one comes, I can try to have some type of routine. And I'm sure any parents listening are laughing because they appreciate my ignorance to that, but I'm trying. There's obviously going to be a slowdown when the baby comes, so just please be patient with me. I'll do my best. I'll make videos when I feel like I've got something to say. Like here at the moment, I don't really have any videos to make. I can't think of anything. So, keep that in mind, please. I'm doing my best. I think I may do an episode 1 review, like a thoughts video. So, let me know if you would like that, and be on the lookout for that, shortly after, maybe in the next week or 2. I might do a giveaway. So if you have any ideas to what type of giveaway you'd like to see, that'd be great. I am kind of working on refreshing my merch a bit. The mugs have always been very popular, and if anything, that's the thing I appreciate the most. People buying my shirts and stuff. Like if you want to, that's super cool. I really appreciate it. But I get it. Buy yourself a mug. The mugs are pretty sweet. I'm on Design by Humans and Streamlabs, so you can look me up on both of those places. And that's what I've got for you this week. If you're on iTunes, please rate the podcast and leave a review. I'm on Twitch, where I stream multiple times a week, and on Twitter, both as Bond Diesel. Twitter, why? Why did you switch to this new format? It's terrible. If you want to support the podcast or any of my other content, please check out my Patreon at patreon.com/theechocast. And that's all I have. So until next time.